So we're gonna cover the dumbbell stiff leg deadlift today. So stiff leg deadlifts in general are a pretty difficult movement for most people to master. Often associated and confused with RDLs, but they do have their nuanced differences. So today we're gonna kind of go over that briefly and just show what a proper stiff leg deadlift pattern looks like. So first thing I like to focus on is the setup. So whether we're doing dumbbells, barbell, it doesn't really matter. I like to pick the load up from an elevated surface. So here we have the dumbbells on a bench, so I'm not having to pick them up from the floor. I can save some energy and also mitigate some risk. A lot of people tend to hurt themselves doing dumb stuff. So often picking it up from the floor, you're gonna tweak your low back. We don't want that. So starting from the bench here, easiest setup. Whenever we actually get into the movement, just like any normal hinge pattern, we wanna make sure that we're braced, our abs are contracted and tight, take a lot of intra-abdominal pressure, so big breath into the belly. Glutes stay tight, contracted whenever we're standing up tall. Whenever we're actually performing the movement, this is what makes it different from an RDL, is we're shooting for a stretch through our hamstring. So whenever we're performing an RDL movement, it's gonna be a very hinge dominant movement, so we're reaching back with our glutes. We're not really shooting for a stretch. So that's what a dumbbell stiff leg deadlift or stiff leg deadlift in general is going to be focusing on, is the actual stretch component of the hinge. So what I'll do is I will actually demonstrate that pattern. So picking them up here, make sure you're clear of everything. So standing up tall, and then going all the way through and actually getting that stretch is incredibly important. So watch what I'm doing with my hips and also where my knees are compared to the load. So here, over a few common mistakes that people make whenever they're performing stiff leg deadlifts. So the first thing that I see often is just letting the load get away from you. And what I mean by that is whenever you're performing any kind of hinge pattern, you want to keep the load, the center of gravity, as close to your midline as possible. So whenever you're performing these with dumbbells, a mistake would be to let them swing out away from your legs at the bottom. So this is what that would look like. Actually pretty subtle, but whenever you're performing them with heavy load, it's incredibly easy to feel. So it's not something you can really mistake that people often make, is trying to force the range of motion. So we talked about how stiff leg deadlifts and RDLs are very different, and that's because we're trying to get a little bit more range of motion with our stiff leg deadlift. But if you don't actually have that range of motion through your hamstrings, you're going to be trying to pull it from your spine and from your lumbar. So not what we want. That's an easy way to get hurt. And that's what this is going to look like. Hope that I don't get hurt. As you can see, I don't have the flexibility in my hamstrings to actually get that deep in the range of motion. So I'm having to reach through my spine. Not what we really common mistake I see is people just performing an RDL. So whenever you're performing an RDL, very simple, you keep the range of motion relatively short compared to a stiff leg deadlift. But if we're performing a stiff leg deadlift, we want to make sure that we're performing the correct movement. So if you're bending your knees a little bit too much during the stiff leg deadlift, if you're allowing your shins and your knees to translate forward at the bottom, the tension's actually going to come off your hamstrings, go into your quads or your glutes or your low back. Again, kind of defeating the purpose for what we're shooting for here. So this is what that would look like. Common regression that we can use from a typical dumbbell stiff leg deadlift is going to just be a kettlebell stiff leg deadlift. And the reason being is what we talked about with the mistakes in people letting the weight swing out away from them. Kettlebell centers you, so it kind of prevents that from happening. So the way we're gonna do it, just stand right over kettlebell, and then the movement pattern's the exact same here. So you're here, still shooting for that stretch, and coming right back up. So if you have a relatively heavy kettlebell, it might actually limit the range of motion you're gonna get. So you might have to step on blocks or mats or something to get a little bit more depth, but still the same pattern, same idea here. Here, keeping the load right in your midline. Another regression we have, 45-degree hybrids. So you can also use a hyperextension bench with a glute ham raise or any other kind of locked in with your ankles and hips hinge pattern. So the reason we're going to be using this is a lot of people just actually don't have the mobility or the strength to support a stiff leg pattern, but we still want to get a stretch through the hamstrings, and that's what this is actually going to allow. So it's going to lock us in, take a lot of the pressure off of our low back, allow us to get some volume in, again, that lengthening, that stretch of the hams without compromising our low back, without compromising our hips or our thoracic upper back. So here's how we're going to do that. So very simple, locking your ankles in, making sure that this pad is below your hip crease. If it's too high, it's going to actually force your spine to flex. It's not what we want. We don't want to turn this into an erector movement. We want to keep this in our hamstring. So here, below the hip crease, we go down, all the way back up. So now we're going to start progressions of a dumbbell stiff leg deadlift. And the easiest one is just moving right to a barbell. And the mechanics are pretty damn similar, not too complicated. The only difference here really is that we're going to be picking up from the floor. And whenever we're picking up from the floor, we want to make sure that that start point is also going to be our end point. And what I mean by that is, again, going back to the range of motion, the flexibility, the mobility issue that we saw over with dumbbells, we're gonna run into the same thing with a barbell as well. Not everybody's gonna have the mobility or the flexibility to touch the floor whenever they perform the full movement. So some people are actually going to require blocks, so putting blocks underneath the plates to limit their range of motion so they're not going to be forced into trying to reach for the floor. Me, myself, I have enough flexibility and mobility to get to the floor, so we're gonna go ahead and go through that really quick. So same stance, same pattern, we're just going to use the barbell. So keeping it close here, keeping my hips high, my back flat. What we're going to do after, for this final progression, I consider this to probably be the most advanced progression for a stiff leg deadlift movement. It's going to be a deficit stiff leg deadlift. And what we're going to do here is we're actually going to extend the range of motion. So what we've seen before leading up to this, especially with some of the limitations from mobility, flexibility issues that a lot of people will have, we've been limiting that range of motion. So we've been throwing blocks into plates. We've been using dumbbells and purposely not reaching for the floor. Certain people are going to have hypermobility, hyperflexibility through their hamstrings. They're going to be able to get more range of motion than even the floor can accommodate. So for those people, it might actually be a good idea to stand on a block or to use smaller plates so they can get more range of motion. Because again, different than the RDL, the dumbbell stiff leg deadlift or the barbell stiff leg deadlift, we're here to get as much range of motion, as much lengthening through the hamstrings as we possibly can. That's the name of the game here, not absolute load. So if we can step on a block, get more range of motion, we're going to get more stimulus for our hamstrings, which is what we want, without actually having to go heavier than we need to be doing. So same setup. Hello there. So I wanted to just say thank you for being a test dummy for this whole project. Obviously, we're not putting out finished products at the moment. It is pretty chopped and screwed, definitely not professional quality, professional editing, but those things are going to come. So this is just a proof of concept. This is just trying to get things moving along in a positive direction and also to get as much feedback as possible from everybody who is participating in this whole trial period. So what this little summary video at the end of the movement breakdown is intended to be, will be just to essentially fill in the gaps with anything that might have been omitted from the videos that were preceding this. But this time, I mostly just want to say thank you. I really, really appreciate everyone who graciously volunteered to help out with this. My goal with this is to just make the most valuable and quality product or service that someone can get, not only from P2, but also from any other company, any other coaches, any trainers, any XYZ fitness people. I want to be able to offer a ton of quality and keep it affordable, honestly. And that's something that we struggled with up until now, is being able to work with mass amounts of people. And this is kind of my pivot to be able to work with as many people as possible, because I honestly think that we have some of the best products and some of the best services out there as far as programming and coaching goes. So I want everybody to be able to experience that. I want to be able to work with as many people as possible. And this is what, this is the first step, I would say, in being able to make that a reality. So again, what you're experiencing right now in these videos and in these emails, not the finished product. It is just rough drafts right now, but every week it'll get a little bit better. Things will get a little bit more refined, and hopefully by the end of this trial period, 30 days, 4 weeks, we will have a really awesome product, service, and be able to onboard tons of people, and everybody will want to tell their friends and their family, and we'll be able to just have, you know, a pretty cool community of people being able to interact and get advice and get help and assist others. And that's really what I'm trying to build, and that's what I'm shooting for here. So once again, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. And this is just the beginning.